time to do the best 10 books I read in 2022. We have some backlists, we have some new releases, we have a mix of fiction and nonfiction. I'm excited to talk about everything. Like I did last year, I'm going to go through the blurb of the book so you have a sense of what it's about. I'm going to do a feels like portion and a for fans of portion, so you have a more atmospheric feeling of if this book is for you. Let me know how your reading year was. I'm definitely looking forward to 2023 reading. Love to know what's on your TBR as well. First up, we have The Goodbye People by Gavin Lambert. This is put out by McNally Editions. Their mission is to republish lost gems from the backlist and hope to find new audiences, and I definitely loved my reading experience of this book. First published in 1971, The Goodbye People is perhaps the greatest novel ever written about post-Manson, pre-Disney Los Angeles. The bisexual draft dodger living on the skids, the glamorous young widow in search of enlightenment, the skinny gamine from out of town who wants to make it in the movies. These are the people who inhabit Gavin Lambert's mordant portrait of South California at the end of the 1960s. Forever swapping addresses, lovers, and dreams, they live in extraordinary, suffocating wealth, or else flirting with a Manson-esque cult, or else in a fantasy where golden age actresses make ghostly visitations to comment on their daily life. All that binds them together is their common sense of aimlessness and the clear, judgment-free eye of a British author trying his best to be a friend to each. I would say The Goodbye People feels like smog and twinkling lights on a hillside, worn leather seats in a vintage car with really distinct creases, and the impression of a body that someone leaves in a bed after they get out of it. For fans of Eve Babbitt's, Joan Didion, any Los Angeles glamour. We have Lapvona by Ottessa Moshfegh. In a village in a medieval fiefdom buffeted by natural disasters, a motherless shepherd boy finds himself the unlikely pivot of a power struggle that puts all manner of faith to a savage test, in a spellbinding novel that represents Ottessa Moshfegh's most exciting leap yet. Little Merrick, the abused and delusional son of the village shepherd, never knew his mother. His father told him she died in childbirth. One of life's few consolations for Merrick is his enduring bond with the blind village midwife, Ina, who suckled him as a baby, as she did so many of the village's children. Ina's gifts extend beyond childcare. She possesses a unique ability to communicate with the natural world. Her gift often brings her the transmission of sacred knowledge on levels far beyond those available to other villagers, however religious they might be. For some people, Ina's home in the woods outside of the village is a place to fear and to avoid, a godless place. Among their numbers, Father Barnabas, the town priest and lackey for the depraved Lord and Governor Willem, whose hilltop manor contains a secret embarrassment of riches. People's desperate need to believe that there are powers that be who have their best interests at heart is put to a cruel test by Willem and the priest, especially in this year of record drought and famine. But when fate brings Merrick into violent proximity to the Lord's family, new and occult forces upset the old order. By year's end, the veil between blindness and sight, life and death, the natural world and the spirit world, civility and savagery will prove to be very thin indeed. Lapvona feels like herbs boiling on a stovetop, chamber pots, not that I have any experience with them, but I do think it feels like a chamber pot, slugs dried out in the sun, and you can still see the remains of their body, and horseflies biting your ankles. It is for fans of medieval times. Yes, the restaurant and life experience medieval times. Witch media at large, and I would say Melissa Broder. Next up, we have Paradise by Fernanda Melchor, translated by Sophie Hughes. Inside a luxury housing complex, two misfit teenagers sneak around and get drunk. Franco, lonely, overweight, and addicted to porn, obsessively fantasizes about seducing his neighbor, an attractive married woman and mother, while Polo dreams about quitting his grueling job as a gardener within the gated community and fleeing his overbearing mother and their narco-controlled village. Each facing the impossibility of getting what he thinks he deserves, Franco and Polo hatch a mindless and macabre scheme. Written in a chilling torrent of prose by one of our most thrilling new writers, Paradise explores the explosive fragility of Mexican society with its racist, classist, hyper-violent tendencies, and how the myths, desires, and hardships of teenagers can tear life apart at the seams. Paradise feels like The Spins. Paradise feels like imprints left on your thigh from a plastic sun lounger. Paradise feels like Rage. I think it's for fans of visceral reading experiences and anyone who likes the author Cristina Rivera Garza. Okay, next we have In the Distance by Hernan Diaz. A young Swedish boy finds himself penniless and alone in California. He travels east in search of his brother, moving on foot against a great push to the west. Driven back over and over again on his journey through vast expanses, Hakan meets naturalists, criminals, religious fanatics, Indians, and lawmen, and his exploits turn him into a legend. Diaz defies the conventions of historical fiction and genre, travel narratives, nature writing, the Western, offering a probing look at the stereotypes that populate our past in a portrait of radical foreignness. In the distance feels like sunstroke. In the distance feels like sand in between your teeth. In the distance feels like a sun-bleached bandana. I would say it's for fans of Manifest Destiny Delusions, genre fiction reinvention, and Edward Abbey. Gold Fame Citrus by Claire V. Watkins. A parched Southern California of the near future, Luz, once the poster child for the country's conservation movement, and Ray, an army deserter turned surfer, are squatting in a starless abandoned mansion. Mohabs, prevented by armed vigilantes from freely crossing borders to lusher regions, have allowed themselves to be evacuated to encampments in the east. Holdouts like Ray and Luz subsist on rationed coal and water and whatever they can loot, scavenge, and improvise. For the moment, the couple's fragile love, which somehow blooms in this arid place, seems enough. But when they cross paths with the mysterious child, the thirst for a better future begins. Immensely moving, profoundly disquieting, and mind-blowing original, Watkins' novel explores the myths we believe about others and tell about ourselves, the double-edged power of our most cherished relationships, and the shape of hope in a precarious future that may be our own. Gold Fame Citrus feels like looking directly into the sun. Gold Fame Citrus feels like sweaty limbs. Gold Fame Citrus feels like broken window pane glass. Gold Fame Citrus feels like hallucinogenics. I would say this is for fans of Elvia Wilk, The Deloriad, Desert Landscapes, and Alexandra Clayman. Speaking of Elvia Wilk, next we have Death by Landscape by Elvia Wilk. This collection is about love, death, plants, and weird fiction. It takes its title from a Margaret Atwood story in which an adolescent girl seems to turn into a tree. It examines works by Doris Lessing, Jenny Hall, Anne Carson, Octavia Butler, Michelle T., Helen Phillips, Mark Fisher, Donna Haraway, and Jeff and Anne Vandermeer. It explores the erotics of compost, vampire-themed live-action role-playing, intoxicated birds, medieval nuns, invasive spores, and solar punk. The book asks, what kind of stories are being written that help us rethink our human-centric perspective of Earth? What kinds of narratives will make sense of the age of extinction? Death by Landscape creates a syllabus for feminist sci-fi and speculative fiction for our time. Death by Landscape feels like listening to high thoughts from your smart friend. And Death by Landscape feels like a syllabus, but made fun. I would say it is for fans of climate fiction, doomsday preppers, and the LARPing curious. Next we have Dogs of Summer by Andrea Abreu, translated by Julia Sanchez. My brilliant friend meets blue as the warmest color in this lyrical debut novel set in a working class neighborhood of the Canary Islands. A story about two girls coming of age in the early aughts and a friendship that simmers into erotic desire over the course of one hot summer. High near the volcano of northern Tenerife, an endless ceiling of cloud cover traps the working class in an abject oppressive heat. Far away from the island's posh resorts, two girls dream of hitching a ride down to the beach and escaping the horizonless town. Dogs of Summer feels like ice cream melting down your wrist, a butterfly clip in your hair, blowing out a Nintendo cartridge, and all-consuming envy. I would say this is for fans of The Deeper the Water, The Uglier the Fish, Fernanda Melchor, anyone who's experienced crushing queer adolescent feelings that had no place to go. Okay, now we have Monarch by Candace Wool. The cryptic worlds of Hannah and Stranger Things mingle with dark humor of Jeremy in this debut novel about a teen beauty queen who discovers she's a sleeper agent in a deep state government program and whose love for a fellow pageant girl sparks an underworld journey to the truth of her being. After waking up with a strange taste in her mouth and mysterious bruises, formal child beauty queen Jessica Klink unwittingly begins an investigation into a nefarious deep state underworld. Equipped with the eccentric education of her father, Dr. Klink, a professor of boredom studies and the founder of an elite study group on idleness, affect, and crime, known as the Devil's Workshop, Jessica uncovers a disquieting connection between her former life as a pageant queen and an offshoot of Project MK Ultra known as Monarch. Monarch feels like frosty, pale pink lipstick, and Monarch feels like sleeping with a knife under your pillow. I would say this is for fans of secret agendas and 90s weirdness. Okay, now we have Sula by Toni Morrison. This rich and moving novel traces the lives of two black heroines from their close-knit childhood in a small Ohio town through the sharply divergent paths of womanhood to their ultimate confrontation and reconciliation. Nell Wright has chosen to stay in the place where she was born, to marry, raise a family, and become a pillar of the black community. Sula Peace has rejected the life Nell has embraced, escaping to college, submerging herself in city life. When she returns to her roots, it is as a rebel and a wanton seductress. Eventually, both women must face the consequences of their choices. Together, they create an unforgettable portrait of what it means and costs to be a Black woman in America. Sula feels like keeping a suffocating secret. Sula feels like small town gossip. Sula feels like two divergent paths that come from the same root. I would say this is for fans of female friendship, genius writing, and dark corners. And lastly, we have The Seas by Samantha Hunt. The narrator of The Seas lives in a tiny, remote, alcoholic, cruel seaside town. An occasional chambermaid, granddaughter to a typesetter, and daughter to a dead man, awkward and brave, wayward and willful, she is in love, unrequited, with an Iraq War veteran 13 years her senior. She is convinced that she is a mermaid. What she does to ease the pain of growing up lands her in prison. What she does to get out of it is the stuff of legend. In the words of writer Michelle T., The Seas is a creepy and poetic, subversive and strangely funny, and a phenomenal piece of literature. The Seas feels like holding your breath underwater in the tub. The Seas feels like when language fails. I would say The Seas feels like floating. It's for fans of Maggie Nelson, isolation, and water signs everywhere. Yeah, those are my top 10 books of the year. I'd love to know how your reading year was, if you've read any of these, if you're adding any of these to your list. As always, I love you. I mean it. Goodbye.